Hey guys, I am DM Zone. This is Gamers Oasis. Let's get into this. So in this video, we're going to talk about all the first level magic user and elf spells there are. In a later video, I might break into the illusionist and into the druid, which shares a lot of the spells on this list, as well as the cleric ones. Let me know down in the comments if you feel like I should do that. Alright, see you guys at the end.
Alright guys, we're going to talk about Charm Person. This spell is an arcane specific spell. This means it can be cast by the magic user or an elf in the basic version of the game. It is both extremely specific and incredibly vague at the same time. It misses very key elements and important facts about how the spell works while giving you very specific, if not odd, details. Let me go ahead and read real quickly what it says here. It states that it applies to all two-legged, generally mammalian figures near to or less than a man-sized figure, excluding all undead class. Now, what's spectacular about that is none of those are actual game terms. Two-legged, generally mammalian figures are not actually a thing that is found anywhere there. Not even two-legged is found in there. Undead class? What is that? It's not talking about a player class. It must be talking about zombies and skeletons, ghouls, and those type of things. But it doesn't state that. And if they're already working on class outside of the game, that makes a lot of sense. And it really meant that this part of it became what really was a bigger part of the game later, and they were kind of hinting at that type of stuff even back here in this game. I would say also it doesn't apply to things like tigers and bears and this type of thing. I would say it has to have a general humanity to it. So while it wouldn't apply to a bear, or maybe a werebear in bear form, when the werebear was in a more human form, or if you're doing like a werewolf thing, a Galabro form, I would say the Charm Person would work. But if they were to revert into that, they probably would break that because they are an animal. So something that affects animal would be better in that circumstance. Also, a certain amount of intelligence. It has to understand morality, in my opinion, to be able to do this. And again, some things don't need to apply. However, it wasn't until the Greyhawk supplement, supplement 1, that certain other things like duration was clarified, how intelligence actually applies, and it affects how often they get a chance to save, whether it's months out or every day, because they're actually really smart. Those type of things matter a lot. It also goes more into a little bit more, or I guess more is applied, in my opinion, about the 12-inch, or aka the 120 feet thing. Some people could see that as if the target that is charmed moves outside of 120 feet, the charm breaks. I don't think that's true, because they go out months. No one is spending 2 months with the ogre they charmed, which you really can't charm ogres, but you get the general idea. The orc you charm, because you don't want it to break. I just think it doesn't work that way. I would say that what a target that has been charmed would be willing to do is very subjective. I think you and your referee need to come together and decide what it would do. For me, it doesn't do the person, the being, the creature, whatever it is, the two-legged, generally mammalian figure that's not undead class, isn't going to do anything that is close to the best day of its life or the worst day of its life. What I mean by that, the knight would give you its meal and go hungry, but he's not going to give you his castle. Does that make sense? The fighter is willing to fight, but he's not willing to hurt himself. Okay? Generally, those type of things I think are good examples of what it can and cannot do. Okay, guys, we're going to talk about Detect Magic. Detect Magic is both a spell that can be used by magic users and by clerics, both. In many of these spells, the divine side is actually more powerful than the arcane side. I think that's because of the lack of number of spells that are in the divine side. However, this one is kind of left very vague. There's not a lot of description. It says that it is both limited in range and in short duration. Now, what does that mean? I think that if you were to go through and kind of decide, okay, we got medium, short, long, you could figure out what that means to you. To me, it means this: a 10-foot bubble, essentially in every direction, 10 foot up, 10 foot down, 10 foot to the right, front, back, left. So a bubble around the player. And I'm going to count the player as a 5-foot square, essentially. So a 25-foot diameter bubble moves through the hallway at what would be like a dungeon crawl speed, or usually like 1/3, or you take it from yards to feet, and that's what you get. I think that is how quickly they're able to take that in. And I would let it last for 10 minutes. So whatever you would normally walk in 10 minutes, that's what I would allow it to go. I think that is a short duration to me. I think that there's a very short duration, which is a round, but I don't think that is that. Now, if you wanted to allow a player to shoot out a 90-foot beam out the front of it and say for a very short duration, one round, you can see what's magical in front of you, I think that's a fair way to go. I think that if a player wants to move at full run or a normal speed and take caution to the wind because they're just trying to find what's magical around them before the spell goes away, allow them to move like they're moving outside. If this is an already explored area and if they're allowed to make those type of moves, I don't see a problem. However, let's say you see an orc. Let's say you see there's a magical glow about it. What is that magical glow? You're not detecting that at a run or at a fast pace. You're going to have to go down to the dungeon speed to determine whether it's the cloak on the orc that's magical, whether the orc has a magical buff on it. I'm also would limit this to only going forward. You can't look around too much. It's too hard on your sensory. That's why I have the initial part in there. That's my stuff. There's nothing in there about that type of thing, but that's how I would run it. Now, I would say that the game gives you some good examples. I just wish it followed through in all those examples. So it gives you 3: person, places, and things. Perfect. Those are 3 very identifiable, very distinguishable things, very important things in the game. However, when it gives you the examples, it gives you 3 examples, but only on 2 of the things. It misses the most important one: the people. It talks about the fact that you can detect that a door may have magic on it and kind of know, I guess, if it's, or know that it may be held, or it might have wizard lock on it. And it might be able to tell you that an item is magical. But one thing to remember, it doesn't say anything about people. Like if a person has a buff on them or they themselves have like hold person cast on them. It doesn't say that. And I think those would be very good. Or maybe they themselves are cursed. That would be a good thing. You can identify that person's cursed. You just can't remove it. You don't have that ability. I think things like that make a lot more narrative sense. And in my game, I think I would do that. So you know my thoughts on this. I don't want to spend too much time going into that. What I will say is, and I'd be very clear on this, it doesn't say whether it's magic or whether it's accursed. It doesn't say whether it's divine or what I'm calling arcane. So you don't know if it comes from a cleric or magic is your elf type of thing. You don't know where the magic comes from. I would say that it probably wouldn't detect psionic stuff later on when you're doing psionic, and that would be part of the weird freakiness of psionics. I also would say it doesn't understand power levels. So if you're in a room with an artifact, it would be just as bright as the +1 dagger next to it. Those type of things are never known until you further explore it. That's part of the obscureness, the obfuscate that is original Dungeons and Dragons. Okay, so we're going to talk about the whole portal spell. This one has a little bit more of a modern feel, a little bit more care and treatment given to it than other spells in this original Dungeons and Dragons. For example, it gives a variable amount of dice for damage. It just says roll 2 dice, and that's how many turns it lasts. I'm going to say it probably means 2d6. That would make a lot of sense, and you take the number you rolled, and that's how many turns it is, and then times that by minutes, 100 or 10 minutes, and you get that many minutes. So that's basically how that would go. But it also gives a lot of options on how to break the spell. First of all, it says that at the end of those that turns and minutes, it goes ahead and ends the spell naturally. It just comes to an end, fades away, it's gone. Okay, it also says that a knock spell can remove it. It also says that the spell magic can remove it. And it also says that any sort of like strongly anti-magical creature can destroy it. Well, what does strongly anti-magical mean? I would say things that have a lot of immunities to magic. I would say anything with a anti-magic ray or cone or something like that, like a beholder, probably would be able to just dispel the magic completely. I would say anything that has like a magic negating thing, like some sort of curse on them or gauntlets or whatever, that would do the same thing. But more interestingly, I would say that large, bulky, strong creatures. So I would say orcs and trolls probably couldn't bust through a door. They're not really strong enough, unless maybe you had a hero amongst the orcs and they were actually treated as like a fighter per se with bonus of strength. I could see that. If you had a special race that had like +1 to damage, kind of like the ogre does, I would say an ogre versus a troll. The troll's not going to be able to get through that door, but the ogre could, because it gets that D10 +1 for damage, showing its power and ferocity. Where the troll is large and terrifying, but it's not the same type of thing. Also, if you have Supplement 1 Greyhawk, they added improved strength for fighters, and in 1876, you start to get bonuses to be able to take out magical doors. This includes both Wizard Lock and the Hold Portal spell. So yeah, that's how you can bust through it. You have to be very strong, have some way to remove the magic, or just be able to wait it out. I would also say that there are probably other ways you can get in too. For example, if you were to chop the door down, that would be a way you could actually get through it by actually destroying the door itself with an axe. The portal is not designed to be reinforcing the door, so battering rams and that type of stuff would do it. What it's preventing is a person being able to push it using the mechanics of the lock to be able to push its way through. You still have a door of whatever. So if you were to drop a roll of toilet paper over a door, then put Hold Portal, that's not designed to keep out the troll. The troll's going to get through that because it's toilet paper. Same notion. You're not going to be able to throw a slice of cheese or whatever onto the face of or the mouth of like a creature and then prevent it from being able to pull the cheese off by casting Hold Portal on the cheese. As funny, as goofy as that might be, the actual game designers have said that you can't make a creature's mouth stay shut because of Hold Portal. It's not designed to work on living, breathing creatures of that type of thing. So just a few more things where the rules don't exactly apply. But I do encourage other thoughts and ways. Maybe put it on a chest to make it more difficult to open, just to make it something that stalls a person or to prevent your enemies from getting to the treasure first. Okay, guys, we're going to talk about the light spell in original Dungeons & Dragons. And this particular spell, it's more versatile than one would think and more versatile than it is in actually other editions of the game. There were some things that the original designers thought would be really cool to do with this spell, and I have my own spin sort of on it. Okay, so this spell illuminates an area by 3 inches. That's 3 inches. Now that's actually 30 feet because that's sort of a war game terminology. But that's okay. It's usable by both magic users and by clerics and elves. The magic users and elves have the same. The clerics actually have a more improved, more powerful version. There's a base number or number of rounds or turns, that this spell lasts. The cleric gets double the base. Not double the level, but double the base. So the way it works is, if you're a magic user, it would be 6. If you were a cleric, it would be 12. And then you add your level to it. So if you were a 4th level magic user or an elf, that would be 10 turns or 100 minutes. And if you were a 4th level cleric, that would be 16 turns or 160 minutes. So basically, it's most of the time you're inside a dungeon. It certainly gives you enough time to go in, do some things, and get out. That's several wandering monster encounters. Most, at least early parties, are not going to spend that long in there. I spoke about there are other uses for the spell. Well, one of the ones that is talked about in, I think, Strategic Review or something like that is the magic user casts the spell in the eyes of the opponent, blinding them. I like that. I don't think it should be permanent blindness. I think that it's blindness you could cure. I feel like a Dispel Magic would stop the light spell from working, and that plays into it different than it would at full duration. But let me get into how casting light in someone's eyes would work in my game, because that could happen to a player just as easy as it could happen to a non-player, and there's no save throw against it. So I kind of am okay either way. I just think you need to be consistent with it. If you're going to do save throw or no save throw, I think it's a little brutal with no save throw. I think it's probably better with a save throw. But if you're not going to give a save throw and that works on your boss, then I think that's probably okay. So with a cleric, we'll just say it's a first level cleric, so it's 13 turns. So for 13 turns, the cleric blinds a bandit. Take the ropes off, they leave him after they're done interrogating. He can't follow, doesn't know what they're doing. Magic user, it'd be 7 turns, 6 plus 1, 12 plus 1. You get the general idea. Now, that'd be how many turns they're blind. I would have them also either have like their vision coming back or a continued blindness for, again, the duration the spell is on them. So where that Dispel Magic comes in is if, let's say, 4 turns in, their magic user or cleric walks over and dispels magic, removing the magic spell from the eyes of the creature. In this case, you could go ahead and do 3 turns or 4 turns, whatever it was, of continued afterwards, and then they got their vision back. I would say if you do some sort of major healing, like a Cure Serious, it probably would heal the eyes. It's a form of damage, basically. I think that would be a way you could bring it back. If you wanted to do it with a Cure Light Wound from first level, a third level spell to remove it, or whatever Dispel Magic is, and then a first level to cure it, I think that works just fine too. That's kind of how that would work in my world. I also think that not all light has to be the same white hue. You could have different shades of hue, all the way to black, where you have darkness, to maybe even like a dark gray, where it's opaque enough that you can see in and out of it, but it gives you the ability to hide. But you could also make it a blue color. You could use it to illuminate things. Hey, don't go this way, put red up. And I think that is a way you could also use it. You could cast it on an object. Like, for example, when Gandalf casts it on his staff and he's able to walk around, you could also cast it on an orb and give it to your thief, who's a human, unless you're playing a halfling, which also doesn't have dark vision or night or infravision. So they would have the ability, when they get to wherever they're going, to go ahead and start using light and maybe control how much light is being used. Okay, so we're going to talk about the spell Magic Missile. It's probably one of the first spells that is not necessarily the best when you first get it. It's better later on. I'm not saying there's no use for it, but you're basically doing a d6 plus 1 damage once. You might kill something, probably not. There are much better spells out there. A spellcaster really doesn't want that limited amount of magic. But later on, it's pretty nice. Now, it's also one of the few ones that a magic user will actually be better at than an elf will over time, because the elf has level caps. It probably will never ever get to 11th level where it's able to get the additional benefits. The most it'll ever have is 3 arrows. You see, for the first level, up to like 4th level or the 5th level, you get 1 arrow. After that, you get 2 additional arrows for 3 arrows. And at 11th level, you get 2 additional arrows for, 5 arrows. And at 16th level, you're getting 2 additional arrows, and now you're up to, what is that, 7 arrows? Now, let's be realistic here. You're not going to run into very many 11th level characters ever while playing original Dungeons & Dragons, but that is theoretically a benefit that could be there. Now, let's talk about what the spell actually does. So, essentially, these are conjured magical arrows for all intents and purposes. Magical arrow being a descriptive term in the game that actually does specific things. I talk about that in other videos. I recommend checking that out. Now, it was clarified in a strategic review stating that arrows, these magic arrows, cannot miss. They hit. The reason why that is stated is because the magic user doesn't actually use a bow, so how can it fire these things? In my opinion, and I'll get to this in a minute, I think it's like arrows kind of float or energy floats, then from there you have arrows that shoot from it. I'll get to that in a second. So the arrows do a d6 damage. They do +1 because they're magic. That's pretty impressive for damage, all things considered. And there is a duration of 20 minutes. So the only thing theoretically the magic user's capped on is the rate of fire, which I assume to be 1 per round, and the fact that it does it for 20 rounds. So that would be your theoretical cap for this spell, which is pretty impressive for a first level spell. Now, nowhere in the book does it say you can't have a spell functioning and then control it, sort of, per se, and then use another spell. So when you cast shield, the shield moves around you, blesses people. You don't have to continuously operate that, and then that sacrifices other spells you can cast. So theoretically, this spell is cast, it lasts for 20 minutes, and you can cast these magic missiles when and where you need them. And I think that is pretty powerful. I think that there is a little bit of confusion when it comes to it because it talks about two different ranges. You have 15 inches, which would be 150 feet, and you have 6 inches for what they call direct magic range. Now, to me, that says wherever you cast it, from there, you can cast these arrows out from there up to 6 inches, which is 60 feet. But you can control when you fire these arrows up to 150 feet away, or 15 inches. That to me makes more sense. But again, this is going to be something you have to work through with your referee, come to an understanding at your table, and then go have fun as planned. Okay, guys, this next spell here is both what I call an arcane spell, as in it is usable by magic users and by elves, as well as a divine spell, which is usable by a cleric. So one of the things that I've noticed about the arcane spells, or the spells that come from the magic user and elf side of things, is that they tend to not be as long a duration as the cleric. That the arcane side is the baseline, and the divine side usually is like the one that was made afterwards with the improvements. I don't think they reduced it down for magic users. The way it's wrote is it's wrote from the arcane side, and then they gave benefits to the divine side. I talked about this when I was talking about divine spells, and I talked about arcane spells and cleric and magic user spells and that type of stuff. And this type of thing, I think that it's pretty close to the same thing. This spell has a duration of 6 turns. That's 60 minutes. That's a very long time in a dungeon. That is 3 wandering monsters in most dungeons, 2 in more casual dungeons. And with the cleric side of things, that's 12 turns. That means that they have to spend 1 spell where a cleric might have to spend, or a magic user might have to spend 2 for the same benefit. Now, where that kind of rubs the wrong way is if you start to run into like magical armors or rings and this type of stuff, it's not going to stack with that. However, this does stack by all seeming attempts to stack with the shield spell, as I was talking about in a prior video. But anyways, you get the general idea. Protection from evil is one of those spells that sneaks up on you and how important it is, because it's not usable for the most part in every situation all the time. For example, it keeps out enchanted creatures, whatever that might mean, because it's not really a term that is commonly used or is heard very often. It's kind of like, what was the undead class I talked about in the prior video? It's not really a thing. I looked through all the books. That terminology is never there. Truthfully, though it omits it in the rules, I think this is something that was commonly known at the game table and just didn't quite make the official rules. To me, an enchanted creature is something that is summoned, i.e., a demon, a devil, an elemental, something from outside this plane that is bound here by some sort of enchantment. I could also see things that are possessed of some sort, like actual possession from spirits and ghosts and these type of things, to golems, which call upon basically servants to or spirits to inhabit a golem, often through some sort of binding. I think those wouldn't be able to do anything with it either. And I think it really brings out an interesting contrast to, he can't touch you. This barrier does not, there's something wrong with that dude. Maybe it affects werewolves and undead like zombies and skeletons because it's coming forth back the spirit and it's enchanted within the creature. Or when the werewolf is in human form, they're able to shake your hand, but when they transition into a wolf form, they're unable then to attack you because the spirit of the creature is there, or the beast, whatever you want to call it. All these things make for a very interesting, very obscure topic that you and the referee would kind of have to agree where you fall on. And I think it's best for everyone involved to know it prior. Beyond that, though, it also gives you +1 to your save versus spells. This is a positive bonus to your dice, meaning you don't have to roll as high to be able to make your saves. It also lowers all enemies attacking you by -1. Now, while it doesn't stack with a whole lot of things, it does affect against like the shield spell. So where you're doing things like mirror image, blur, shield spell, and protection from evil, it kind of builds up and sneaks up on you. That's what I was talking about earlier in the video. Okay, guys, this is another spell. This one here is Raed Magic. Raed Magic is a spell that is both very vague and probably very well understood at the game table how it was actually used. So they didn't really put a whole lot in there about it. They didn't spend a lot of real estate on the book to talk about a spell that Gary Gygax and a lot of the other, or probably all the testers, basically understood how it worked. It was probably one of those things I talked about in the other games where a lot of it comes down to, everyone knows, and this is for our local gaming group, so we don't have to go into it in great detail. Well, the game has grown since then, and this doesn't help. So anyways, let me get into how I would do it. It says that this is a spell that by which the incantations and on an item or on a scroll are able to be read. Without such, they're unable to be read. Okay, pretty straightforward. There's no discussion of duration. There is a discussion that this is good for 1 or 2 uses. There's no dice rolls to determine that or clarifications on what counts as a use. So I'm going to go ahead and say how I do it. Personally, I do it as if it is a ritual. So it takes 10 minutes, much like a Cure Light. So when my elves and magic users come into play and they start off at first level, I only give them 1 spell. They can pick at random or they can pick the spell and then they get for free, as a bonus, I guess you could say, Raed Magic. Because I don't see how a magic user or elf really learns magic without this thing. It's kind of like the basic requirements to become the class. And since I only give 1 spell, it makes a lot of sense that they would have it. I also make it, like I was saying, a 10-minute cast. It takes 1 turn. They get a use from it. This use could be to read something for basically a turn, or to be able to identify what a scroll is and how it can be used without releasing the magic. Maybe reading the runes on a rod to be able to activate certain charges. The referee and you can kind of determine whether that's a D3 scrolls, the scroll of a D3 to know which ones they are, or whether it's once per scroll, or a D3 charges, or 1 charge, or it just knows the rod. I'll let you guys kind of work that part out. That's frankly out of the rules, and it's kind of between the referee and the player, or the caster really, that is doing it. I think that there are some benefits to having this spell accessible, so that you can decide not to trigger a trap or to be able to navigate around it or read some hidden message on a map or in a doorway that you run into. And it also puts that decision making in there. Do we have time to stop? We're going to have a wandering encounter if we stop to do this. Is it better just to send the beefy fighter and knock down the door and take whatever the repercussions are? I think those are great things and bring drama and dramaticness, if that's a word, to the game. And when you lose someone to that, you kind of second guess whether it's a good decision. Or if you stop and cast and then you run into a problem and you're down in a worse situation, should you have waited? I think those are all things, and time is the key limiting factor. And that's a big part of what the game was supposed to be about. Okay, so this spell we're going to be talking about is the shield spell. The shield spell is a special spell. It offers AC 2 for those that are dealing with range attacks from enemies. That is the equivalent of plate mail plus a shield. And against melee attacks, it gives you against your enemy an AC of 4, which is chainmail plus a shield. So that is pretty good armor class, considering most likely the caster is not wearing any armor. Now, if you're an elf wearing magic armor, that's a potential. But most people are not going to be wearing any sort of armor and being able to cast spells. Now, this spell lasts for 20 minutes, which is a decent duration, certainly a combat. So when is this spell good? This spell is good when you have multiple sleeps already. You're fighting things that can't be affected by sleep. Things like undead, for example. Or you know you're going to be going into a boss fight where sleep will not be the most advantageous thing. That could be super high level. That could be, like I said, undead, oozes, these type of things. So that is when the shield spell is better. So after you get a few spells, might consider getting yourself the shield spell. The shield spell, if you read it though, has some alternative things that might be beneficial for. For example, it says that it creates a magical barrier between you and your enemy that basically hinders the attack from coming through. So if this is a physical thing, can it be touched? Can it be manipulated? Can it be pushed and pulled? Can an ogre grab it and pick it up and hold you in the air? Even if it is AC 2 versus ranged or AC 4 for melee, can he grab it and then use that as a way to, slap you around or whatever? Is this a thing that dissolves in his hand and reforms away? All these things are like important questions that I think bring a bigger and greater picture to the world. Is this something that if you were caught in a trap, kind of like where the walls are crushing in on you, the ceiling's crushing on you, it becomes a barrier between you and that? Do you then get smashed anyways because it's pushing you against the opposite side of the trap? Do you get pushed off a wall, off a cliff, because the wall's moving and it pushes you farther out than everyone else? Could someone grab a hold of it to prevent you from falling, for example? I think there's a great number of questions, and the openness, the open-mindedness of you and the referee kind of dictates maybe some of the off-script uses of this spell. I think that the way you imagine it could change other aspects of the world. You could use it as a show of force, saying, I am powered up and ready for a fight. Do not mess with me. I think that's a big thing too. Okay, guys, we're going to talk about the sleep spell. The sleep spell, finally, is a spell that we're going to talk about that pretty much everyone feels is the best spell in the game for low levels. There's some argument to that, but I would probably say that it is probably one of, if not the best spells in the game. There are some situational times when it is completely useless. However, those times are pretty rare and infrequent, and I think that it's worth keeping around. Even into the later levels when you're higher level and you're not running into many creatures that it would affect, because there's not a whole lot of other first level options that do as much for as little, if that makes sense. All right, so let's break it down and talk about what exactly it does. This spell affects between 2 and 16 hit dice worth of creatures. It doesn't matter what level you are, it's always the same. You find this by rolling 2d8 and then totaling those 2 dice up, and that's how many hit dice it affects. So, in original Dungeons and Dragons, there are creatures that are going to be 2 hit dice plus 1. That means that they actually count as 3 hit dice. That's important to know because it is a pretty common thing to run into. So let's say you're fighting an orc gladiator and it's 2 plus 1 hit dice and it counts as 3. You would have fewer of those you could put to sleep than you would if you had just a 2 hit dice creature. That plus 1 is significant, and that's why that plus 1 is usually given to the more martial classes and less often given to things like the magic user or thief, and later when that one came out and that type of stuff. The spell also only works up to 3 hit dice, so a 3 plus 1 hit dice creature cannot be affected, at least not in groups. If you're targeting a single character, it will affect up to a 4 plus 1 hit dice creature. Now, it won't affect a 4 plus 2, which is a thing that could also be found. And it will affect a 3 or a 3 plus, or it'll affect a 1 hit dice if you misjudge the situation and the guy or the creature is not as hard as you thought it was. It'll affect all of that. However, it will not affect anything higher than that. So there is a level cap to how often this spell can be useful. But since creatures didn't level per se, and they just added more or they became a harder creature, it affects goblins or orcs. Basically the same. And there are certain creatures that are literally 4 plus 1 hit dice. And once you know what those are, you know that spell will affect that creature. Okay, so let's say I roll 2d6 and I get max dice. I roll a 16. I go up against a whole group of gladiators, orc gladiators. I get 5 of them affected by the spell. 5 times 3, because they're 3 hit dice, 2 plus 1, is going to be 15 hit dice out of the 16. The 16th hit dice doesn't affect any of them because there's not any 1 hit dice creatures in there. That means that it fades away and does nothing. Now, if you want to be theatrical, maybe dramatic, you could have like one orc that starts to fall and you're like, yes, and then it pulls through, gets like angry and then charges, and you pick a random target and it looks more angry and all that. It's not more angry. It's just you adding some drama to it and showing that you couldn't affect any more hit dice than what you affected. For a person who's really paying attention, saying the quiet part out loud, shall we say. I know that's very specific, but that just is what it is with this thing. Okay, so lastly, there was a clarification in Supplement 1 Greyhawk. It's near the back of the book and this type of thing, but in there it talks about some rewording of some of the things, so it's a little bit clearer what hit dice affects, how it affects those type of things. And it also mentions something that was probably well known at the game table and by the playtesters, and that is that it does not affect undead. And I think that's pretty evident looking forward that it never should have affected undead. And I think they knew that back then. It was just an oversight. Okay, so we're going to talk real quickly about the spell Ventriloquism. Ventriloquism is a spell that came out in the Supplement 1 book, aka the Greyhawk Supplement. This isn't a true campaign setting type of thing. This was just the first book that came out talking about Gary Gygax's world. I talk about that in a whole different video. Right now I'm talking about the spell, so I'm not going to get too far off into that. However, this spell, it can be cast by elves and by magic users and this type of stuff. It throws their voice up to 60 feet away or 6 inches away, so that they're basically able to make it sound as if the title says that they're talking from a different area. This could be used to communicate a message so that only the thief can hear, because you can see something coming up to the thief and you want to let the thief know, so you whisper into the thief's ear. I personally feel like this is a very small amount of thing. I mean, you could do some tomfoolery. You can make the statue in the cemetery start talking to a person. You can make the farmer's cow talk to a person traveling down the road to kind of like, whoa, what's going on here? But outside of that, there's really not a whole lot of practical use for it. Personally, I feel like anything the caster does could be transmitted sound-wise to a different location. So if the caster is going through a window or shutting a door and they want to make it sound like it's a different window or door within 60 feet, then that makes sense to me. If they're inside a crowd and they want to have someone sounding like they're yelling, over here, I think that's fine. I think I think there is other evidence that would show anyone who is keen or clever what's really going on here, especially if you've dealt with this in the past and you know this is a thing that could be happening, or if you're a magic user yourself, maybe it just doesn't sound right. There's no save throw on this, so maybe there is some sort of way you can get past this without that if you're going to improve the power of this. For example, you're running down a hallway, there's 2 turns. You go left, the person who's following you, the pursuer, doesn't see which way you go. You make the sound of the door shut to the right, but you went left. Now, it doesn't mean that 100% that is what the person's going to believe. Maybe there's tracks, there's snow, there's mud. Maybe there's a window, they can see movement through it. Maybe your allies are not quiet because they're wearing plate mail. And as you are running through the room, they can hear plate mail to the left, even though it sounds like you went to the right. Maybe there's a person just sitting there washing a pot or a pan and she screams or he screams because you entered the room and they don't know who you are. Maybe there's a dog that barks or a cat that scurries off. Some sort of reaction. That's why I think that this spell is not the end-all be-all. I feel like spells should be a little bit more powerful in this way, especially if you're trying to get away from just keeping spells like sleep around. I think this is a good one that brings some versatility to the magic user and elf class. While not being a complete illusionist spell, it is meant to be more helpful, and it would be nice if it was allowed to be a little bit more than the baseline spell. Anyways, that's how I would play.
Okay, guys, thanks for watching the first level magic user and elf spells. What do you think? Let me know if there's any suggestions you would like to see in future videos, or any corrections or modifications that I've done here. Thank you. Have a great day and keep rolling those dice. Bye.